Welcome, everyone. One thing and one question I heard today probably like 20 times is like, why VMware, right? Why VMware and plastic pollution? Like, what does that test, to do in common? And I'd say, it kind of really comes to the DNA of VMware, right? So, all of you been in Mark's opening keynote, right? Someone missed it? I know Nicola did. She was on the train here. But Mark kind of touched interesting points, and when we kind of talk about the corporate sustainability at VMware, we use a lot of terms like force for good, right? And one thing is the technology in itself is neither bad or good, right? It's kind of neutral. So you can use the same kind of nuclear power to make 500,000 bombs every day, and kind of heat our climate, but you can also use that to create kind of an energy out of it, right? So it's really it's up to us to decide how we're going to use technology, right? It's going to be a force for good. We can make a change with technology, or we can make it worse by using it for wrong purposes. So in this kind of overall track, which we call outcompete destructive systems, VMware is really trying to make a kind of a bridge in between stakeholders, teams here, large corporates globally, because we've been running lots of data centers across the globe for the last 20 years. We kind of we more or less enabled stuff like cloud computing, and virtualization as technology happening there. So we want to kind of bridge the gap here by bringing the right stakeholders together to one place, right? Opening the doors for you to reach enterprises, because we've been in that space for like 20 years, right? And together with our folks from Dell and Digital Asset, and everyone else. The vision, and you see it on the banners, it's all the way on the kind of web and Odyssey challenges. But this kind of comes in I'd say, even two problems we're trying to address with this one, right? And I guess the introduction was about marine life, and we have a lot of plastic out there. Every one of you have seen pictures about plastic sitting everywhere. There's just piles of it, right? And statistics is not in favor of us, because plastic production literally kind of went 20 times within the last 20 years, right? So it's progression. So if we're not going to do anything, right, it's just going to get worse. Even if we're going to do something, it's still going to be worse, because we already have it there, and it's not something which can clean up itself. So we need to tackle two problems there. One is really get rid of the stuff which is already existing out there. Another one is really cut the line for the plastic to end up in the oceans or in the landfills or getting incinerated and so on. Right, so it's a very complex, it's a very global scale problem, and it definitely requires a lot of effort, time, money, investment, and huge kind of global push to it, where I believe VMware, together with Digital Asset and Dell, can lead that effort. So what I want to do is introduce Dr. Siobhan Gardiner to kind of talk a bit from like subject matter expertise point on what we actually see with the plastic.
Right, so can everyone hear me okay? I think that's okay. I'm just going to start with this image. Has anyone seen this image before? So it's from an August 1955 edition of Life magazine. When I first saw this image, I thought the family in the photo were kind of throwing up their hands in horror and were fleeing the items flying through the air, but alas, no, this is a joyous occasion. They are celebrating at the fact that they can spend more time together, because we're living now in a world of convenience where we can throw out the cutlery and the plastic packaging that we use every day. And actually, when you look at the caption that was underneath this image in the feature article, it read, the objects flying through the air would take 40 hours to clean. However, no housewife need bother, because every single item can be thrown away after use. And okay, it's 2020, attitudes have changed a little bit since then. We've all seen that horrible video of the plastic straw being pulled out of the nose of that turtle. And we've also seen that haunting image of a lonely seahorse cruising the ocean currents holding on to a cotton bud. But a fact remains is that we are still very much in the midst of a plastic crisis. And still, when we look at the plastic that we use day to day, nearly all of that is still coming from virgin fossil fuel feedstocks. So plastic manufacturing actually accounts for about 6% of total oil consumption as well. And just to sort of give comparisons, when you look at some figures, that's equivalent to the total aviation industry. So when we look at the plastic that we see most in our lives as consumers, that's very much the plastic packaging that we see in our food and around our shampoo bottles. And that equates to around 141, hang on one second. There we go, 141 million tons per year. Of that plastic packaging that we produce, only 14% makes it into some kind of recycling process. Everything else is either pushed into landfill, or it's simply burnt, or actually it just leaks out into the environment because we haven't managed it properly, and it makes its way into our water systems, our rivers, and ultimately our oceans. And even that 14% that makes it into some kind of recycling logistics mechanism, only 2% of that is actually being effectively recycled. So a plastic bottle being made into another plastic bottle. Quite often it's the case that once plastic is brought in, it will be sort of downgraded quality-wise and will be used for a lower grade quality application, so things like single-use foils and films. And actually, there's still a significant proportion of the recycling that comes into the sector that simply gets lost in the process, and that equates to around 4%. So we need to do better. And as a result of that mismanagement, we see images like this. But there is hope. We're seeing kind of localized initiatives that combine technology platforms with social enterprise, and they are cropping up all over the globe. And some examples of these would be such as Next Wave, which is a multi-partner initiative that actually Dell is a partner of, and I'm sure my co-panelist from Dell here can sort of talk about that. But also there are local social enterprise initiatives sort of respectively on East and West Africa. So Mr. Green Africa, which is based out of Kibera Slum near Nairobi in Kenya, and also Kaliba, which is based in Ghana. That are actually working with local communities who are being affected by the plastic waste through things like flooding and just pollution and dangerous conditions within their towns and villages to create new job streams and new value for those communities. So I had the pleasure of actually meeting the CEO and founder of Kaliba, who's a young, amazing entrepreneur called Prince Agbata, at the end of last year. And his story was something that sort of really stuck with me. So he started this social enterprise that uses kind of a smartphone app to connect informal pickers with collection points. So it enables companies to kind of track and trace where plastic comes from. Awesome. But this came from a story of personal loss, because he was the survivor of a major flood event in his village. Because the reason why this flood event happened was because the storm drains in the village were choked with plastic bottles. And as a result of that, he lost his best friend. So he decided, he's not going to put up with this anymore. He's going to be the change in his community. And so these types of initiatives are now cropping up, and it's wonderful to see. There are other parts of the plastic supply chain where you can sort of make interventions, and that's in the difficult period after you've purchased a bottle, so post-consumer usage. Such as an initiative that's based out of Italy called Junker, which again is a smartphone app. And this is less about the tracking and tracing, but more about understanding consumer behavior and seeing how you can influence behavior and habits in the home. So, my next door neighbor actually is not particularly good with their recycling. They don't wash it, they don't separate it. There's lots of things in their bin that shouldn't be in there. But if we can improve that recycling sort of behavior and habit, that is fundamentally going to improve the amounts of volumes and quality volumes of materials that we can then track back into circular economy. So yeah, different levels of the supply chain, different types of interventions using different technologies. We're also very much at a point where the big food and beverage companies like the Unilevers, the Coca-Colas, the PepsiCos of this world are making huge new commitments on how they are managing their plastic waste footprint. So at the end of last year, we were hearing things about how these companies are going to both systematically reduce the amount of plastic they are using in their product lines, but also make sure that the packaging that they do use is 100% recyclable, but also that their product lines are made up of 100% recycled plastic. So kind of 3 different ways of tackling that. And that's wonderful as well. But I feel there's a gap here between the commitments and these local operations and communities that are being hit hardest by the plastic waste problem, to see how we can effectively track and trace post-consumer usage of plastic, aggregate that in a sufficient volume that means something to the PepsiCos and Coca-Colas of this world, and tie that back into a secondary material marketplace that has trust, transparency, and traceability. hence why I think it brings the link between this challenge area and VMware. So it's not all doom and gloom. There is definitely a lot of work to be done, and I'm really excited to see what the different teams come up with in April. But thank you, and I'll pass over to the next panelist.
You can keep that. Right, awesome. So let me introduce you the panelists here, and we're going to have a bit of chat and kind of hear different opinions, and different kind of perspectives on this problem. So yeah, probably starting with Nicola. Nicola is Director of Sustainability Innovation at VMware. You already heard Siobhan. Siobhan is the Global Climate Change and Environment Lead at Deloitte.
We're getting to global.
All right, yeah. So just skip the global, but climate change and environment lead at Unilever. Talia from Digital Asset, creators of DAML, and you already see DAML everywhere, right? Which is Digital Asset Model Language. So Talia is the product manager there, working for the Enterprise Solution Group. And last one, but not the worst one, Mike Bachman, global architect working for Dell Boomi, Office of CTO, right? And myself, Gintaras, VMware blockchain, technical guy. All right, so yeah, I know, should I sit there? I can do it here as well. It's a very uncomfortable setup, I guess, so I'm gonna sit there. All right, guys, so Nicola has a microphone, so we can start with Nicola. I mean, your personal kind of, take on plastic pollution problem. I mean, we discussed many hours, I guess, about all of this challenge when we were setting it up, right? And really, getting closer to the hackathon now, and especially for you guys, now is to learn, like, why does plastic pollution, circular economy, all of those things really kind of matter, and the scale of it, and I guess, how we can tackle that, and why VMware, fundamentally.
Great, lots of good questions. Could spend all day answering. So I would say a couple of things. Obviously, it's a big problem. Plastics have brought us all a lot of convenience, a lot of value, just like oil has, right? But it's also created this enormous problem. And the way I think about environmental problems in general is that you generally can't rely on the consumer to solve the problem. It's got to come from the business side. My philosophy is that the capitalist system has created all of these problems, but the capitalist system has the potential with the right incentives to solve the problems. And so you always have to tackle it from the business incentive. Like, why are businesses, what's in it for them to solve the problem? Is it competitive differentiation? Is it a better mousetrap? Is it cost savings? Is it their consumers are demanding it? Is it regulations or trying to avoid regulations? And so I always look at for businesses coming at the problem, because if they go after it for business reasons, they're going to solve it in a big way. So I think Siobhan had mentioned Coca-Cola and Unilever and Nestle, right? They're getting lots of pressure from countries even now saying, especially Southeast Asia, right? They're covered in plastic, and they're saying, you guys have created this problem. You need to solve it. We're going to ban your products. That's a big problem for PepsiCo and Coca-Cola and Nestle, right? They do not want their products banned in those countries. Big markets for them. That is the business case for them to solve the problem. Yeah, and so I think in any solution, they're a big part of in the ecosystem of the solutions, right? Because you have to, as Mark Buckley said, you've got to think of the system level, that they're a big piece of that system that can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. And they're looking for solutions, frankly. They're begging the world, smart people like you, to come up with the solutions that they can help them solve the problem. So I think when you're thinking about your solutions, think about how this could work for them. So that's
Also, to add on that, yes, plastic, we need to get it out of the environment. We need to reduce our plastic footprint overall. But at the same time, when you're thinking about from the systems approach, how plastic has enabled these products to get into the hands of people that would otherwise not have access to those types of products. If we think about things like sanitation and soaps and stock cubes and these types of basic consumer products, the reason why they are able to be put into the hands of communities that are, like less than $2 a day incomes, because of the packaging that they come in. So, and if you're thinking about removing that from the system entirely, you need to think about, okay, how is that going to affect the consumers? So it's a little bit of how do we use plastic and how do we bring those materials back into circular economy? It's how do we look beyond plastic and think about alternatives to that as a material? And then what can we do with the plastic itself? When you think about how plastic is used and the whole problem with downgrading plastic after it comes back in the first time round, and food packaging, for example, there needs to be lots more investment in chemical recycling so that you can produce high-level, high-grade plastics that can then be used again. But again, we're a little bit away from doing that at a scale that is required to solve this problem. So again, not just the technology, it's also understanding the material and then also understanding people and behavior change as well.
Sure. So for those who know digital asset or don't, we're focused on making it easier for people to build blockchain or distributed system solutions in an easier way. And as I've heard Siobhan and others talk about this, what we want to do is break down the barriers to entry for people to actually create these systems and make it easier. So hopefully you'll join us tomorrow to learn more about what DAML is, the digital asset modeling language, but we want to make it so that other people can create systems quicker, faster, and easier, and you don't have to be a specialized cryptography engineer in order to do that.
Yeah.
And hopefully I won't be too bad on this. No, but from our perspective as well, as a technologist and having worked in technology for a couple of decades at this point, one of the things that I realized as a data nerd, we're giving off a lot of digital exhaust in everything that we do, right? And so when we try to discover data in the first place, that's the first problem, much like I imagine it is discovering where all the thrown away plastic has gone. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is sort of elucidate this type of environment through data. And the more data we capture, the more we can do with it. So as part of the challenge, some of the things that I'm thinking about from a future of technology perspective applied to problems of sustainability is how could machine learning and deep learning affect in a systematic way how we discover where the plastic is located and then ultimately collect it as well. Secondly, I'm looking at the blockchain as well, or as we're going to call it, the distributed ledger, because blockchain often has a negative connotation associated with it and has to do with cryptocurrency more than not in people's minds. So we'll call it a distributed ledger. And we can define what those differences are maybe another time, but that's another area that we can help in trying to understand the traceability and provenance of where these plastics not only are, but where they're going through the supply chain. And then also using edge systems as well. You may have heard of it as the Internet of Things or something like this, but how can sensors be applied to certain regions where maybe heretofore they haven't been? And can that data feed in real time a network and a system that can update some sort of dashboard at the least, or create an outcome at the best? And so these are the types of things that we're looking at, and we're looking to you to give us ideas with and build in your challenges.
Okay. Awesome.
I was going to say, I'm not sure whether it's worth taking that moment to talk a bit about NextWave and Dell.
Yeah, no, thank you. So becoming new to sustainability, I'm not really involved with NextWave that much, but not yet anyway, but getting there. What I will say is within Dell and Dell's corporate sustainability initiatives, we've set forth some pretty aggressive 2030 goals. And Nicola, you could probably talk about those from a VMware perspective, but they also dovetail into Dell as well. But I'll also say that we're taking a very serious look at all sorts of issues as it relates to sustainability, not just plastics, but certainly plastics. You might have seen that a certain percentage of our packaging on the outside of some Dell systems it contains some content of recyclable plastics. We want to increase that to 100% by 2030. So in certain items, I should say. But the idea is to get more sustainable, not only in our packaging, but in our total supply chain as well. And then ultimately not just what's on the outside of the package, but what's on the inside of the package too. So take a look at our 2030 initiatives from overall sustainability. This includes better environment for workplace, sourcing materials, looking at flows transnationally, how it all relates to all of these elements of source minerals and plastics, and that sort of thing.
Great. I have another angle, because I think Siobhan already kind of touched that, talking about social initiatives, right? I mean, all of this is really like supply chain. So technically, you can plug anything to that chain, right? It could be lithium, it could be minerals, could be plastic, it could be anything, to be frankly open, right? Another thing what we see and we had those discussions last year, I guess, with Mike, talking with some of the kind of customers of ours, right, and partners. It's really the kind of social aspect of it, right? Especially when we try to address the problem of collecting the plastic, submitting it, child labor, health issues, things like that. I mean, this is a really important piece, especially, Africa, Southeast Asia, or countries where we have, the kind of low-income societies. I mean, how we can address those and how important are they? Because I know from corporate sustainability standpoint and corporate responsibility standpoint, this is a huge problem, right? And I guess maybe, for some of you, it kind of seems obvious, you take the plastic bottle and bring it back. But if that's brought by the kid, companies like Dell or VMware can actually, end up in a very bad situation, right? So you have to tackle that. It's a very systematic and large-scale problem. I guess, I don't know, Siobhan, want to...
So as mentioned, I've recently transitioned from Unilever to Deloitte, where I was also working in a sustainable technology role. And when you look across kind of like traditional key crops in your mind, so like things like rice or things like cocoa, we're dealing with smallholder farmers who are all independent operators. When you think about recycled plastic, there is actually quite a lot of similarity between those informal pickers who are picking plastic and bringing it to a factory gate as to what would be similar with like a tea farmer in Kenya bringing their produce to a factory gate. And so therefore, the same protections and measures that we make for farmers, so things like fair trade, fair pay, safety and security, should apply then to these informal pickers who are picking plastic. And you see these, you hear about these terrible stories about people walking on landfill with no personal protective equipment, no shoes, just picking plastic, and it's not safe. And they're doing an extremely important role, which is, better stewardship of the environment and management of these secondary materials. And, obviously more should be done to make sure that they are resilient and they are safe and they have the same security as farmers. But the other thing to do, and the reason why I refer to Next Wave is because it was my first understanding of how big companies can close the loop on their own supply chains. So through partnerships with companies, with social enterprises in places like Southeast Asia, all of a sudden you have a framework where all the stakeholders are aligned. So the plastic that is picked is traded and fairly paid for and can be then tracked back into a manufacturing plant to be then produced into product lines. And that transparency is really important. And again, something that you see across other commodities, but for some reason we haven't quite cracked it with plastic yet.
Awesome.
I think also too, we've spent a lot of time, this group, talking about how do we partner more effectively together, and that's what's really inspiring and exciting about being here, is how do we break down barriers to technology, which is, like I said before, what Digital Asset is passionate about doing, and make it so that we can really focus on how do we partner together from both a corporate and grassroots level to enable effective change.
And I'm certainly not the blockchain expert, but correct me if anybody else is. But I think one of the values of blockchain is you can cut out the middleman, and you can provide more value to the first person in line picking the plastic, and get more of the payment to that person, and then also have the transparency at the buyer end, which is the most important thing for the corporate buyer, is they want to know that there isn't, that this isn't child labor, that this person didn't cut their foot in doing the job, and that they're getting, that there's a lot of social value in that community. A lot of the money is going to that community. That provides a whole lot of value to that corporate buyer. So the blockchain actually can provide that transparency and the provenance.
Yeah, and I'll add one more to that too. It's a risk mitigator as well. So the idea of having auditability is a deterrent for anybody who would want to sort of affect a given supply chain to not act in a bad way. And so we have really three benefits that a distributed ledger could provide. And I think a lot of the logic of all of this, as Digital Asset would discuss with their particular markup language for smart contracts, in conjunction with a blockchain that's easily accessible, even if you don't know how to code, even if you don't know how to set up your own blockchain, even if you don't know how to write a front-end application. With Boomi, with VMware, with Dell, you have these technologies that make that that type of agency real for anybody. So you can just be your creative selves. So, we're here for the, let's call it the citizen developer, right? That's everybody who doesn't code regularly in their job, but for those of you who do, we want you as well. And so, we want no code, low code, and all code. And those are the types of things that we're looking for in our environments, right? And so technology doesn't have to be a barrier to entry, and it certainly doesn't have to be a barrier to coming up with these new and innovative ideas that you will invariably have. Right?
Awesome. How much time we have? 1 hour? 45 minutes? 15 minutes left. All right, awesome. Yeah, I think, should we get some questions? I see the hand there, here. Oh, it's cool. Because I just figure out we're running out of time.
Hi, I'm
Awesome.
Judy Piper. I work for an organization called C Labs. We build a seller platform. Seller platform is an open blockchain platform, actually. We're mobile application driven, where we solve the problem of P2P financial system, right? And our mission is to create this financial system that creates a prosperity for all. So this session definitely relevant to what we do and what we build at Cello or C Labs, is that I think there's opportunities for, our mobile application is given to the folks who are underbanked and then no banked. And they have access to financial system. They can save and basically recycling the plastic bottles, and then they are given the stable coins they can save, and so there's no middle guy. So I would love to connect with you and talk to you after this session about how we can partner, because I think the seller platform solves a lot of problems that you just discussed.
Sure. I mean, our stand is right here, just in front of the windows. So we can always, jump there and have a discussion. I think we had a question there.
Whilst the microphone's on the move, I was just going to say,
Let's do one here.
financial inclusivity in this space is so important, because we're talking about communities that either don't trust banks or have no fixed address, so that, they can't register for a bank account. So thinking about what is going to lift these communities up is a really important part of this challenge. The technology is there, and this seems to be a recurring theme across the different talks this morning as well. The technology exists. We need to think about the people, and make sure that's actually intrinsically linked through every part of the solution.
Hi, my name is Ashwin Uchal, and I am from India, the west coast of India. And I've been born and brought up next to the seashore. So I've seen the problems that what are growing and stuff like that. So it's a great initiative, first of all. And the few points that I heard from the discussion so far is that here we are trying to link most of the problems back to the corporates that are generating the plastics and stuff like that, the bottles and the Coke, Pepsi, stuff like that. But in India, the problem would be is slightly different when it comes to the plastic waste that is generated. Here, the plastic waste, what the people usually litter along the coast is are basically from peanut packets or some other packets which are plastic, where the name of the company itself is not registered, or it is done in some local shops or in local rooms and stuff like that, where you cannot directly relate back to who is the manufacturer. And most of the litters are not from these big brands over there, the bottles and stuff, because these bottles can be recycled and easily picked up by the people who are gathering this litter. But the rest of them are of no use for them. So these are still existing on the beaches because nobody wants to pick it up and waste their time on this. But is there any initiative on this regard which is done along these lines? This I want to know.
So one of the big problems, one of the challenge areas for being able to aggregate and get enough plastic to fulfill these types of promises, so having 100% recyclable plastic across all of your product lines, is actually getting enough of the stuff, finding it and understanding where it is. So, these companies, they're not interested, the idea is that they're not just interested in collecting their own plastic. They need to find as much of this stuff as possible. And when you think about the kind of sachet type plastics that you're looking for, that's tough because a lot of that stuff is not necessarily immediately recyclable. You have to look down the chemical recycling route to sort of make that viable. But again, it's these sachets in South India and Southeast Asia that is fundamentally difficult to pick up, difficult to track and bring that back in. But I think there are schemes now in areas where things like polyethylene chemical recycling plants actually exist, where people can deposit that plastic. But because they're so tiny as individual units, it's difficult, right? I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for things like, exchanges at these convenience stores itself, and where you can deposit the plastic and get some kind of credit or incentivizing vouchers or things like that. I think at a local level, possibly these schemes already exist, but in a way that scales, that then means something to these large companies, I think there's a gap. There is a gap.
I think, too, also in the emerging economies where they've gone mobile first, there's a lot of opportunity with entities that we've talked to on how to connect, like Siobhan said, with the companies and what they're doing from an application level, and how do we, as leaders in that space from a large corporate, connect with them and make it accessible. And that's why we're looking to people like everyone here, because it sounds like you know more about it than someone like me who focuses on the technology side.
I probably could add one thing. Just World Economic Forum, just during the Davos, actually published a press release about the study they've done in Southeast Asia, basically to collect the plastic or actually aggregate it and kind of bring it back from the oceans. You literally need $50 billion investment in there. 50 billion, yeah. So it kind of accounts almost to roughly $28 to $40 per metric ton of plastic, right? So it's a huge kind of economical value of gathering that plastic, bringing it back to the economy. And as Siobhan mentioned, it's really hard to get that plastic. There's plenty of different kinds of plastic, right? And you need to get it somewhere, start recycling and aggregating and so on. And part of this challenge is really, for you to come there and kind of try to hack ideas, what you could do, I guess, incentive is one of the things,
Could you take a picture of the plastic and determine how recyclable it is, where it is on the supply chain? These are just ideas that are, that we think about, but how do you put something like that to the test? Can you do it en masse and see what percentage of the overall plastic in a given surface is recyclable, and then go after that content and train a data set somehow to be able to determine that? These are things that would make life a lot easier for people looking to recycle different types of plastic more efficiently. So that would be helpful. Great, yeah.
On my way.
Yeah, gentlemen.
And he has great socks on as well. Those are, I'm envious.
Hello, I'm an oceanographer.
Yes, you are.
And I've heard nothing so far, but I came in late, for which I apologize. Do you have any strategies or solutions or thoughts on how to get rid of plastic, which is already filling up the oceans and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future?
I'll let the scientists go to work.
Well, I think Siobhan's comment about that companies have these big goals around using recycled plastic and they don't have enough of it now. And
They can't find it.
yeah, they can't find it. And clearly there's a lot in the ocean. So, well, exactly.
Awesome.
I think
Yeah.
that's the point is that there might be, it might be economical, right? Because I'm not sure what they're paying per ton of recycled plastic, recovered plastic, right? But
Sorry, but where it is fairly well known.
no, I understand that, but it's the cost of collecting it from the ocean. So the point being is there's a growing market. So this is all the capitalist system, right? There's a growing market for this recycled plastic. So where there's a demand and a supply, right, that dictates the price. So the point is if the price gets to the point where it can be recovered from the ocean, because I'm assuming that's going to be more expensive than recovering it. Maybe not, I don't know. So the idea is come up with a good solution to recover it from the ocean, and because there's definitely a market for that recycled plastic.
So there's got to be a market for it to do anything.
There is a market for it.
But
Yeah.
so the other thing is that if you pick plastic out of the ocean, you can't just reuse it. Well, it depends what the application is that you're going to use it for. But if a Coke bottle makes its way to the the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, you can't just take it out of the ocean, rinse it out, and then put Coke back into it. So again, it's like it's the technology and the tracking to be able to actually aggregate and bring that back into land. Then also that needs to be coupled with investment and scale up of things like chemical recycling, so that which then forms part of that supply chain. When plastic goes into the ocean, obviously there is that degradation factor, and the longer the plastic is there, the more difficult it's going to be to fetch out because it is breaking down into microplastics. It's making its way into fish and ecosystems. How you rescue that, I have no idea. And it's something. It's a huge area that goes beyond the realms of the digital technology platforms that we've discussed today, and requires very much a systems approach to sort of tackle it.
You're absolutely right,
Yeah.
but my question was really, is there any strategy or thinking about your organisation about how you might do it? Rather than shutting your eyes and saying, well, it's gone, it's very difficult, it's very expensive.
But I think that's why we're here, right? Because we want to be part of the solution, and we know there are bright minds out there that are looking at how do we do that and how do we enable that.
So I'll give you two examples of just like just really fast, because I want to hear your question for sure. Number one, there's the ocean cleanup effort that's going on with, is it Ocean 40, with the big boom collecting the plastic. If you have a relationship there and you wanted to use technology to be able to identify, create data sets, do things for others at scale, then we have the technology to help enable that sort of stuff on the, let's call it the back end. To actually, for our organizations are not chartered with going out and fetching the plastics. So how can we enable the technology, or you as technologists or builders, to be able to come up with clever and innovative ways to go get things? Here's another example. I've requested training sets of data to be open sourced from, I won't name the companies, but different recycling companies that are integrating photography of each plastic, whatever shape it's in, whatever shard it is. And so if we were to get this data set, how would that enable us to go out and identify plastics more easily? Is there an isotope? Is there an algae? Is there something that we could put some sort of biological marker in that could also be used for tracking and tracing of where plastics are sifting to? In terms of the edge-based technology and data coming off of that, if it can be translated, put into a contract or some sort of logic, tracked and traced through a system like a database or a distributed ledger of some kind, now we're dealing with something where we're elucidating this, this whole cycle, of the system itself. Those are the types of innovative things that I think we have to get to. But from Dell's perspective, the first thing we have to do is sort of highlight the dark spots of a supply chain, wherever that is, and build from there. So that's where we're at.
So just to point out from one side, also on Nicola's side, there's a need for plastics to actually be valuable. And this requires that your companies actually produce and put out valuable plastics, even if it's one-time use only or whatever that there is, because we're talking about like 40 different types of plastic here, and only like 2% of that is actually recyclable in any meaningful form outside of like construction or burying it. And so I've worked a little bit in this field. I'm a hardware engineer. I do robotics. And my main concern has been that most of the plastics manufacturers out there have no real incentive because the big players in the space don't really have the money to spend that extra 20 cents per product or whatever to convert that plastic waste into something that is collectible. And so if you ended up with an ocean full of valuable plastic, there would be people out there collecting it. At the moment, we're kind of in this transition phase where there's not enough regulation to actually push that forward or put that in place on a global scale. And I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
I think you're right. We're at that tipping point where all of a sudden demand for recycled plastic is doing this. The value of recycled plastic per ton is doing this, which is then creating the opportunity for jobs, creating the opportunity for financial frameworks that can then manage the movement of that material through financial and physical landscapes. But again, we're not there yet in terms of scale to make that meaningful. In order to shift the needle on the 141 million tons or whatever of plastic packaging we produce a year, this needs scale. And
even polyamide, like existing plastics that are out there, could be integrated into your products already today. That's not happened because there's still a very price-aware, mentality towards all of these different resources. So, I mean, to your point, if you had the data and tracking and you could create this massive simulation of like how it's going to flow from one place to another, would that actually change the behavior of your companies to put out plastic that has this?
I think it could.
Recyclable effect.
I think it could.
Can be given to the plastics bottles that we collect. The incentives should be given to the community why they need a clean environment, right? Cleaning up the landfill. So if you collecting the plastic, only recyclable plastic that has a value, there's very little incentives versus if you give the community impacted by those landfills because in rich countries are dumping their land to use as dumping ground, unless you give them those community incentives, you could by cleaning up that your community, you get the amount of wealth that you're creating, right? So I think a value should be putting onto the plastic bottles itself. The value should be given to the community itself is like cleaning up and then creating a beautiful city that the clean air that we enjoy very much.
Yep. So I think we're running out of time, and oh, sorry. All right. So last question, guys, and then because I still have like 3 or 4 slides actually to show you.
At first, hi, I'm Alina. I'm a developer. I've been interested in plastic pollution for a while, and at first I would like to address the problem and after ask the question. So the real problem is that many companies like Coca-Cola, they put blame on the consumers. So they are the ones who make this plastic, which is not compostable, which could be, by the way, if someone doesn't know, the first ever made plastic was of cell-based plastic, which could be decomposed easily just in the ground. But nevertheless, company decided that just a few cents profit from each bottle, if it's made of petroleum, it would be better for them, and they absolutely don't care about that, what they will be trashing the planet. And right now we sort of discussing the solution. Let's take a mop and wipe a little bit on the ground while the tap is opened and the water continue leaking, and there's a lot of it. Is the really solution you want is something related to blockchain, because it's not going to solve anything. We need to simply use different kinds of plastics. They could be biodegradable. There are different kinds, biodegradable and decomposable.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the remark I gave you while opening. Biodegradable plastic usually consumes.
What solutions you expect? Do you expect some startup to come up with
yeah, I mean, so I guess
more biodegradable plastics?
I think we don't have too much time on this one, really. But I mean, plastic is everywhere, right? I mean, plastic got us to space. Plastic really helps to save lives. So you have a lot of medical equipment actually which helps to save lives, right? We usually talk about those things. or plastic bottles or Coke bottles when we talk about plastic.
Yes.
But plastic is everywhere, right? You have your phones, full of plastic. This building basically uses a lot of plastic, for insulation, cabling, and so on and so on. We have a massive amount of plastic.
Not just,
Yeah, so
I think too, like Nicola has mentioned, like we need to think about yes, totally, maybe there was a decision. There definitely was a decision made a long time ago that we maybe took the wrong route on, but we're operating in a capitalist environment where, like Gintaras said, there's plastic everywhere. And from a blockchain perspective, it's how do we make consumers more aware? How could I go into a store and if I scan a QR code, I know that my Coke bottle on the left is, made from recycled plastic versus the thing on the right that's not. And how do we make people more empowered to make those decisions? And I think that's where the blockchain transparency and tracking
So the
comes
solution
in.
you're looking for is only blockchain related?
Not necessarily, no.
The other thing to your point is that there needs to be a switch to better materials. That's very obvious. But to the point of the professor, but also to Mark's point this morning, the plastic that we've already made is still in the environment and we need to track and collect that. We can't just leave that there and then switch materials and not do that. So this is part of the systems approach to tackling a much wider industrial problem.
Yeah, so I guess, I don't know. Let me finish two things, right? So one, promise to you guys. So one thing is don't worry about tech. We have you covered. I mean, we have a lot of stuff. Like it's the busiest slide you probably ever seen, compared to only Mark. I'm getting there, right? Just making sure it's really busy. But I mean, we have all the technology needed in place, whether it's open source, it's enterprise grade, and so on. And especially if you think about large enterprises, they're different beasts on their own. You have to have very different set of technologies. And I think that we can have a discussion about what you guys have. But if you hit, someone like, US companies, federal companies and so on, you're going to have like a huge list of compliance certifications and so on, which needs to be adhered to, right? And those things cost money, and it costs a lot. So instead of, so I mean, we're kind of working on that set, right? I mean, we've been doing that for 20 years, together with Dell and so on, working on enterprise systems, really. So one thing, is our promise is, to have you covered with tech. Another one is really, we're here because we know those guys. We know guys like Deloitte, global system integrators. We know a lot of stakeholders in the space. Enterprises, corporates, interested. I mean, myself and Mike, we've been working on a couple deals in sustainability space, for a year now, I guess, right? So we already have customers working and kind of trying to tackle those problems, and those problems exist, right? So I mean, it's really for you like a nice playground to jump in here because what we do is we provide technology. We're not really an application business. So none of those companies really building applications. We're really good at what we're doing, and we're just setting a foundation, and just making all the dots connect and so on. So it's really, your skills, your knowledge, your ideas, how you can crack open those challenges, and connect the dots together. What can, go forward and shine, and it's your applications, and we can help you, get you to the market. Another thing is tomorrow, if you're still around here, we have this meetup, same building. I think it's up there, pizzas, beers, and stuff. So we're gonna geek out a bit, and hack. And yeah, become dabble ninjas. So it's going to be myself and Vivek. We're going to have some fun there. We're going to have probably a guest speaker. I know, Talia, you let me know if we have it. And yeah, thanks. And see you at the Odyssey.